What is it? 12:29. Where is everybody else? Bigger.
Okay, good afternoon, directors, staff. Before we get going here, I want to acknowledge that we are here in the boardroom on the Lee Quilta speaking people. I have confirmation of quorum, and just so directors know, we have Director Jules, Moglove, and Evans in the boardroom. I'll call the meeting to order. An adoption of public agenda.
Move adoption.
Second.
Lee and Wally. Any additions?
Can we include the addendum, the last item?
It's already on there.
Okay, we won't have to vote on it. Okay.
Yeah, it's already on the agenda.
Okay.
Yep. Anyone opposed? Carried. Petition delegations, prevention of human trafficking. We're joined today with Kathy Peters, a BC anti-human trafficking advocate, and she'll make a virtual presentation. Welcome, Kathy. The floor is yours. And as per usual, we give our presenters 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much. And I appreciate being invited. So I started the Be Amazing campaign, Be Amazing to Stop Sexual Exploitation. My website is a teaching website, beamazingcampaign.org. Human sex trafficking and sexual exploitation for the purpose of prostitution is the fastest growing crime in the world and very much here in BC. So what is human trafficking? It's the recruiting, transporting, transferring, receiving, holding, concealing, harboring, or exercising control over a person for the purpose of exploiting them. The key word is exploitation. Stats. 13 years old is the average age of recruitment, much younger for Indigenous girls. In the Lower Mainland, the target age, and Vancouver Island actually, the target age is 10 to 12-year-old girls. COVID has made this worse. Traffickers are organized and sophisticated. 54% in the sex trade are Indigenous, 70 to 90% in urban centers. They are severely overrepresented in the sex industry. This is the worst case of systemic racism in the country. 82% involved in prostitution had childhood sexual abuse or incest. 72% live with complex PTSD. 95% in prostitution want to leave. It is not a choice or a job. 84% of prostituted persons are pimped or trafficked. So organized crime and international crime syndicates are involved. Crime follows the money, and traffickers make hundreds of thousands of dollars per victim per year. I've been raising awareness about sexual exploitation and child sex trafficking to every city council, MLA, MP, and police agency in BC since the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act, PCEPA, became federal law in 2014. So the police would enforce it, the public would understand it, and be able to report it. The law has 4 parts. Number 1, it targets the demand by targeting the buyer of sex. The trafficker, facilitator, John, buyer of sex are criminalized. Number 2, recognizes the seller of sex as a victim, usually female, and is immune from prosecution. Number 3, there's exit strategies are in place to assist the victim out of the sex trade. And number 4, there's supposed to be a robust prevention education program in place so youth, children, and the vulnerable are not pulled into the sex industry. So this law focuses on the source of the harm, the buyers of sex, and the profiteers. The clear statement from Parliament was that girls and women in Canada are not for sale. This is the RCMP campaign, that they are full human beings with dignity and human rights. This law is not enforced in BC. Vancouver and Toronto are global sex tourism hotspots. Canada is a child sex tourism destination. The global sex trade is growing very fast, targeting our children because children is where the money is, fueled by the internet where most of the luring is taking place. Contributing factors are globalization, unregulated technology, limited law enforcement, and very little prevention education. Canada has a brand new National Human Trafficking Hotline number, and here it is. It comes from the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. That number you should know. And they've got great posters. You can get them for free and put them up in all of your communities, postcards as well. And on the back are the numbers and then the indicators what to look for. Provincially, we have OC Tip, and there's a free course there. And Victim Link has a helpline. I've used both of them. Pornography is fueling the sex industry and creating the market for commercially paid sex. Men and boys are the buyers of sex and are the key to end exploitation. VPD gave me this great line: boys and men must understand there's a sacred part of the woman they have no right to. So what could your municipalities, your regional district, what could you all do? I say a really simple strategy. You want to reduce the demand by education and targeting complicit businesses, and diminish the supply by education and public awareness. The businesses most involved: unregistered massage and body rub parlors. Not giving licenses out to these would cut human trafficking drastically. Nail spas, day spas, modeling agencies, tattoo parlors, escort services, cheap bars and hotels, men's clubs, Airbnb, VRBO, casinos, strip clubs, organized crime clubhouses, bus stops, homeless camps, tent cities, work camps, pool halls, community centers, malls, anywhere that youth congregate can all be typical covers for sexual exploitation. The sex industry is targeting our youth, children, and vulnerable in every BC community, and schools are the recruiting grounds for gangs and sex trafficking. A critical deterrent is the School Liaison Officer Program. The officers prevent crime and protect the vulnerable. An anti-police narrative harms our communities. BC is behind every province in Canada by not enforcing the federal law or providing prevention education. Trafficking and prostitution cannot be delinked. Not all prostituted individuals are trafficked, but prostitution could not exist without trafficking. So who's targeted? It is a gendered issue. The sex buyers are male, the victims are female. The majority of cases of traffic victims are under 25. Indigenous, new migrants, LGBTQ, disabled, youth at risk, youth in care, any girl under 14, and some boys. How's it done? The traffickers are typically between 17 and 34 years of age. The traffickers meet the demand for commercially paid sex because it's so lucrative. They make hundreds of thousands of dollars per girl, as I mentioned. The majority of traffickers are male, but a growing number are female, especially in schools. 90% of trafficking is online. Traffickers use social media platforms like Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Kik, TikTok, video game sites, and chat rooms. Boyfriending and love bombing is the tactic. They promise free drugs, alcohol, expensive gifts, presents, anything the parents will not give. The results and outcomes: it is a deadly industry. Don't be fooled into thinking this is work. Victims end up drug addicted, mentally ill, committing suicide, or are murdered. Only about 5% get out. The sex industry is not glamorous or empowering for any woman. Think Robert Picton, the pig farmer from Port Coquitlam, who dismembered prostituted women, particularly Indigenous women. So how do we stop this? The 2 E's. We need enforcement of the law and education to the 3 P's: police, politicians, and the public. So what are the signs you look for? First of all, the girl becomes secretive, often has an older boyfriend that you may or may not meet. New clothes, jewelry, gold chains are popular, change in dress, frequent sleepovers at a friend's house, change in attitude to school, friends, family. The grades drop. They're exhausted. They have 2 cell phones. Oh, they have cuts and bruises. Tattoos are so cool. And tattoos of a crown, diamonds, or initials. The girls don't realize that they are being branded by their pimps because it's their boyfriend. And strangulation marks around the neck are becoming common. What can you do as citizens? I just keep it simple. Learn about the issue, which you are doing today. Share, talk about it with your family and friends. And most of all, alert politicians and law enforcement this is an issue. And I did send a number of handouts, which will give you a good start on stopping this. I do have 2 asks. Would you be willing to write the Premier and Solicitor General that this crime is a priority in BC? There needs to be funding for provincial law enforcement. I work with them closely, and a provincial awareness campaign. And number 2, to write the federal Justice Minister, David Lametti, to uphold that law I spoke about. And just so you all know, I was asked to present to all of law enforcement across Canada a couple of weeks ago. That was a huge, huge honor. Thank you so much. I hope there's some questions.
Great, thank you very much. And any questions? No questions? Okay, so Kathy had a couple requests. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none. Okay, so, Director Baker, go ahead.
I believe it's something that we should definitely be supporting and writing the letters. It's obviously a very serious issue, and we need to be all over this, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Go. And Director Davis.
Yeah, I'd like to have access to some of this information. I'm not there right now, but I'll be passing through Campbell River tomorrow. I'd like to pick up some of the materials.
I'm looking staff, is the materials here now?
Mr. Chairman, there's a number of documents that were attached to the presentation on your agenda. So if it's in addition to that, we could certainly ask for it.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
So I guess the question, Kathy, that the stuff that you mentioned, is it all attached to your document?
It should be.
Okay,
It should have been sent, yes.
okay, good enough, thank you. Okay, so we have some interest in writing letters. Do I have a motion, resolution?
Baker would like to make a motion that we draft and send letters on behalf of the SRD.
Okay, to Premier Horgan and to the Justice Minister?
That's correct. Thank
Okay.
you.
I have a seconder, Director Evans, seconds.
Second that.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none on the motion, I'll call question. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. So we'll draft some letters and send them off.
Good. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, next item. Adoption of minutes.
Mr. Chair, before you move on,
Yeah. Go ahead.
just as I guess it's a historic kind of thing. Normally, we have a delegation, and if there's an ask, we do the ask we add it to new business and deal with it there so that we can have appropriate amount of discussion or whatever. I'm just passing that on. That's the past practice. If you want to change it, that's up to you.
I don't recall that past practice. My past practice is we deal with it then. Ain't that, Tom?
Well, that's not the way we've done it at the SRD.
Seal?
Yeah, again, my memory is the board has the latitude to deal with it whenever they want. So I don't know if there has been a consistent pattern or not. That's not my memory, but whatever the board's will is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so on E, adoption of the minutes for the regular meeting, April 27th. Motion receive? Director Evans,
So
second.
moved. Lee,
Director Lee, thank you. Any discussion? Director Moglove?
I think it should be adoption, not receipt.
Sorry, adoption of the minutes, sorry. It's adoption of the minutes. Any discussion? Call questions, anyone opposed? Seeing none carried. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, no public considerations. Notice of motion, meeting scheduled for First Nations relations. Director Moglove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move that the start times for meetings for the First Nations Relations Committee and Municipal Services Committee be reversed, and I'll speak to it if I get a seconder.
Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Director Davis, thank you. And
Thanks. And so my rationale for switching the times, currently, the First Nations Relations Committee and the Municipal Services Committee, they meet on the same day every 4 weeks. And at the moment, First Nations Relations Committee starts at 9:30 and Municipal Services Committee starts at 10:30. And that would be before our regular board meeting. So what's happened in the last few months, I think since January, the Municipal Services Committee meeting has been canceled a couple of times. And so what's happened is those of us who attend the First Nations Relations Committee at 9:30, and then we're done, and in particular those who have driven in from say Zabalas and or Tastis and or Cayucot, then they have this sort of really long gap of time between the completion of First Nations and then the regular board meeting at 12:30. So that's one reason why I'm seeking to have the times changed. The second reason I'm asking is that my experience is that the agenda for First Nations Relations Committee is usually more, I'll use the word robust. There's quite a few more items on the agenda for First Nations Relations Committee, and oftentimes we find ourselves not having enough time to complete the agenda within that hour. We're pressed up against the Municipal Services Committee. So I haven't had that experience on the Municipal Services Committee. So I think reversing the times would give the First Nations Relations Committee more time to finish their business, and it wouldn't necessarily negatively affect the Municipal Services Committee meeting. So that's my rationale. Thank you.
excellent, thank you. And Director Abram.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Claire. I have no objection to changing the times, but I don't think your rationale really works. It's exactly the same situation if you just reverse them. You're going to have the people from the First Nations Committee having more time to kill than they would have otherwise. So there'd be a bigger gap from 11:30 till the board meeting. And then the other part is I think the First Nations Committee, I think if you go back, and I'm sure Tom has the exact record, I think we pretty much always have finished our agendas within the hour. So we haven't really pushed up against the Municipal Affairs Committee and shorted the Municipal Affairs Committee by any time. So although I don't object to it, as I said at the very beginning, I don't think the rationale really, it's just a matter of choice. Which one do you want first? And you want municipal services first? Fine. That means you're going to basically stop at 11:30. And it seems to me that your agendas at municipal services are usually the more robust from what I've seen. And, maybe I'm incorrect on that because I haven't attended any. So do as you please, do as the board pleases. I don't care.
Okay, thank you. And Director Mogul, if you had a comment?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to mention that the First Nations Relations Committee has never been canceled in my experience, whereas Municipal Services has been canceled on a couple of occasions. And as a member of the First Nations Relations Committee, ever since its inception, there have been several times that although we may have finished on time, we had to have moved very quickly and not have enough time to discuss some of the issues at length. So having been a member of both committees, I can assure you, based on my experience, that the agenda items on the First Nations Relations Committee have been much more expansive and requiring much more discussion, in my experience, than the municipal services. That's just
Director
a response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Baker.
As the chair of the Municipal Service Committee, I don't have a problem moving it. I'm not on any other committees, so I mean, the time distance in between the municipal service and the regular board meeting, it becomes a lot more distance in between. I don't have an issue with that because I understand what Director Mokloff is saying here. There is the Municipal Service Committee, we haven't gone over very much since I've been involved. And if they need more time on the other committee, I don't have any problem with that at all.
Okay, thank you. And Director Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Although I'm not on either one of these committees, it would make sense to me if you stagger the committees on different days. The board meets twice a month, so you could have First Nations meeting at 10 o'clock before a board meeting, and then 2 weeks later you could have the other committee meeting at 10 o'clock. And that would make it easier for all the people traveling to get to the meeting and be awake and ready. It'll give you time to do your business. I think First Nations will get busier now that we've, conducted some workshops, and there's some suggested work plans from First Nations for us to consider. So I would just say that maybe staff should look into staggering the meetings on different days.
Okay, I got a staff comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just for the board's information, all board days that are scheduled are currently preceded by one committee or another, or several. So there are no vacant mornings that are available preceding any current board meetings that are scheduled. They're occupied by either First Nations, Municipal Services, Electoral Area Services Committee, and those committees do typically meet. So I'm not sure what vacancies.
It's okay. I just threw it out there for an idea.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further hands up, so I'm going to call question on the motion. Anyone opposed? See none, carried. Okay. Next item, Chair's report. The only report I've got to comment on is the 2.5-day First Nations Truth and Reconciliation Training Conference, I guess, morning training. Absolutely fantastic. Our MC, Elia Brown, was just excellent. I think all my years on, not just as a mayor and on the regional district board, but going back to my days of school board and working with First Nations and reconciliation, this is the best organized conference I've seen. It was just absolutely fantastic, from like all the presenters and workshops and stuff like that. It was awesome. A big hand clapping, thanking to Tina McLean. Awesome job, Tina. Was absolutely excellent. There is some stuff that just come out. Tina sent out, I think one late yesterday, on some information on some workshops and some action plans. So we'll get to that down the road. So again, just that's my only comment as far as Chair's report today. And Director Adams.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo those sentiments. Even though I was not able to attend the entire 2.5 days, for the times that I was there, I was very, very impressed with the level of insight that the presenters had. So great job to Dave and the entire SRD team for putting that together. Well done.
Excellent, thank you. I don't see any further hands up, so motion.
Move receipt.
Thank you. Seconder. Second by Director Evans. Anyone opposed? Carried. Next item, committee chair reports. First Nations Relations Committee. Motion to receive the minutes for the April 27th.
Move receipt, Moglove.
Seconder.
Second.
Director Davis, thank you. Sorry. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Sorry, Director Jules.
Good afternoon, everyone. No, I wanted to speak on what you were speaking about with what went on last week. I think it was amazing. I mean, the start from start to finish, it was very good. I mean, having a local come in and do the prayer, and also with this, we did a cedar brushing, and it was very, very a very uplifting part of the meeting, or part of the whole 2.5 days that we spent here. I mean, to start it off in the right way was just amazing, and I too want to echo and thank Tina. And yeah, I think one thing I wanted to mention was I would have loved to see more of our board at this meeting, just to have our faces here, and because it was a big learning process for everyone, and I think everyone could have gained something very positive out of this, and in a true form of reconciliation. I mean, we all have to open our ears and listen, and this was a big step forward in that direction, and I just want to thank everyone that was there, everyone that showed up, and everyone that took part. It was a beautiful 2.5 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Jules. Director Davis.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I sort of wanted to comment on that as well, and what Director Jules was saying. And I think for a lot of people, 3 days was a long period, and because of it, we might not have gotten as much uptake as we should have. I personally would have liked to see more directors there, and I think if these things were broken up into 1-day sessions or even 2 days, I think we might get better engagement on it. But I was happy to have attended the entire thing, and it was a wonderful set of sessions.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so question on receipt of the First Nations. Oh, Director Lee.
I just wanted to say that I attended all 3 days, and the only negative thing I would say is that I felt the venue was way too small for the number of people participating. I definitely did not feel comfortable. I wore my mask the whole time. I didn't do any cedar swishing because the room, the little cubby hole, was too small to be in there with somebody else. Maybe it's just because 2 years of COVID have made me very wary about congregating, and especially in small groups. So if we were to do that kind of event again, I think we should look at a bigger venue where we can space out more.
Okay, thank you. Call question receipt of the First Nations. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. Staff reports, bailout voting. Motion to receive the report from CEO.
Move receipt.
Second.
Wally and Adams and CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom will speak to this for us.
Go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as pointed out in the report, the province has recently changed legislation, essentially removing any ability for local government to specify or classify the types of electors who would be eligible for mail ballot voting. So the choice currently for the board is either retain mail ballot voting but make it universal for elections and by-elections, or to get rid of it altogether. And those choices are elaborated on in the report for you. Thank you.
And question, Director Abram.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know what's gotten into the province that they would want to take away a person's right to vote, basically. Mail-in ballots are, in some cases, the only way that people can vote. And I just don't understand it. I think, you know, the options that are presented, that it's the what was it, option, I believe it was A with, yeah, option A, and just continue on with having a mail-in ballot for all elections, whether they be the regular election or the by-elections. There should be that opportunity for people that cannot get in. And in, the area that I represent, all of the outlying areas, the outer islands, it can very well be that they can't get in because of weather. And that's happened many times to people that they were unable either on advanced voting days or on the actual voting day. You can't, predict the weather. So it sometimes keeps people from voting, and sometimes that can make a big difference in what happens in an election. And everybody that's, compromised in some way, disabled or whatever, it would just be criminal to take that away. And I don't know what's gotten into the province that they would be on one hand, trying to support things like disabilities, et cetera, inclusivity. And at the same time, they're saying, let's take away mail-in voting. It makes no sense.
Okay, thank you.
So I hope that we will be wise as a regional district and keep the voting the way it is.
Okay, I want to go to staff first and then Director Wally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the regional district will not be able to keep the voting the way it currently exists, which is essentially setting out criteria to qualify for mail ballot voting. What the report identifies is that there are essentially two options left. Option A, to expand mail ballot voting to include all electors, or B, to get rid of it altogether. And there's no middle ground, which is where the regional district currently is.
Okay, thank you. And Director Wally.
Yes, I have a question for staff to address concern. Can we be certain that we can maintain the integrity of the election, that we don't have people with multiple ballots issued under other people's names or ballot harvesting and that kind of thing?
I'll go to staff.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think experience in other jurisdictions has shown that mail balloting is not quite as secure as in-person balloting. However, it's a question of risk versus reward. There are benefits as well by allowing people who would not otherwise be able to vote to perhaps participate. But the fact that we mail ballots through the postal system and that those ballots are beyond our control until they come back in, it's a bit different than in person. So if you're thinking strictly from a security perspective, it may not be quite as secure, but there are other things that the board, I think, should be considering when it looks at this issue.
Okay. And Director Lee.
I think that if somebody can't make it to a regular poll that's scrutinized, that they should get a mail ballot through the advanced voting system. I have, in my experience, seen that there are too many opportunities for shenanigans when you do bulk mail out of ballots. When you have ballots, and I saw it with the provincial voting methods, they were wanting to look at changing the way that they vote on MLAs, and rather than first past the post. And my mother was in an apartment in Campbell River, and they delivered like a bulk of ballots to the apartment, and the mail lady just left the ballots in a big elastic band on top of the mailboxes, and people took them and did multiple votes. Like nobody got to vote in her building, but maybe one person took them all and voted. I've also seen on the islands where they get delivered to post offices and they have mailboxes. People that live in Victoria, people that are American citizens, some of them getting these bulk mail out ballots, and they're not supposed to be entitled to vote. If they pre-registered to vote, then our elections officers could check them out, make sure they were entitled to vote. But the way things are now, it's so wide open to corruption. It's not a good idea. So I support B, that we
well,
don't do
when-
that.
When we get a motion on the floor, we can talk about supporting what? Once we get a motion.
Okay.
Okay, and I've got Director Anderson.
I'll pass, thanks.
Okay, Director Adams.
Thank you. I agree completely with Director Lee's comments and fully support her comments on the bulk drop-offs that happen, and that I think Mr. Gates has clearly identified what the problems are with the having to do mail-in ballots to everybody within the regional district. I just don't see that as being a viable or feasible option. I think with the alternate voting dates, it provides an opportunity for people to get there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other first-time speakers? Seeing none, Director Abram.
Okay, so I'm obviously not understanding this. The way I read option A in the receipt is that amend our bylaw to offer universal mail ballot voting for any election by election, et cetera. Does that mean that they're saying that there will not be polls and that everything will be done by mail? Or is it just people that request a mail-in ballot?
I'll go to staff.
Is that, what are we doing now? Are we doing request mail-in ballots?
So, Mr. Chairman, first I'll answer the first question, which is yes, option A would give all electors, any elector who qualified to vote, the option of requesting a mail ballot instead of showing up in person at a polling station to cast their vote. What we are doing now is we are offering that choice only to select persons who meet specified criteria in the bylaw. If they're unavailable during, they're not going to be in the regional district during the voting cycle. They're in hospital, they're sick, or they live too far away to even contemplate getting out to vote. Those kinds of situations. So, but that option has now disappeared, and we do need to decide which way the board wishes to go in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so what will it look like if we go the new way? What will a voting day actually look like?
CO?
Well, the two options are if we go with A, it means everyone and anyone can vote through mail-in ballot, and option B, nobody can vote with a mail-in ballot.
Well, then that one is the one I was objecting to, is option B, because
You can't object to nothing.
Because-
There's nothing on the floor this time.
pardon me,
There's nothing
we're
on the
on,
floor.
we're
to
on
object
receipt,
to.
are we not?
We're still on receipt.
Call the question
we
on
on-
receipt.
Okay,
Call the question on receipt.
I have another hand up in the audience here. Director Mogul.
Yeah,
Well,
I
Mr.
think-
Chair, you cut me off. You cut me off. I was talking to receipt.
Director Abram, you were
It's in
talking,
the report.
Director Abram, you were
It's in the
trying,
report.
you were discussing option A and B.
They're in the
And-
report.
And you were talking about against one, against the other. We don't have anything on the floor to be against yet.
No,
just in
I'm,
the
I'm
report.
asking for, I'm asking for an explanation.
You received your explanation.
Well, I didn't on B. That's the one you didn't let me have an
So-
answer.
It's
So
simple.
option A, if we move with option A, everybody has the ability to mail in vote. If we go to option B, nobody can mail in vote.
Correct. Okay,
Okay, so that, okay, fine. I'll talk to it when we get to it.
okay, thank you. Director Mogul.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to clarify option A. So that doesn't mean that there would be a bulk mail out of ballots. It would be only those people who requested to have a mail ballot that would receive that mail-in opportunity. Is that correct?
Go to staff.
Essentially, Mr. Chairman, we do provide mail ballots. I would say 95% of them are provided through Canada Post. The odd one will get picked up at the office, but for the most part, they go through the mail system. Once they're into a mailbox, we have no idea what happens to them until they come back.
No, sorry. Yeah, that wasn't my question. My question is, we're not going to be sending mail-out ballots to every person in electoral areas A, B, C, and D, just those people who request a mail-in ballot, if we go with option A.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so on receipt, I'm going to call question. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. Do I have a resolution?
Move option B.
Second.
Option B is moved by Director Wally, second by Director Lee. Director Anderson, you have a question?
Rather just voicing an opinion, I will be voting against option B. I think that the ability to have access to voting is far more important than any, I think, relatively minor concerns around anomalies. And I don't think that these local government elections are generally high stakes enough that there's going to be a massive voter fraud attempt. But I do think that in this day and age of increasing uncertainty for all kinds of reasons, that being able to give voters access to vote is just paramount to democracy. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Director Abram.
Yeah, I too will be speaking against option B, and I echo the comments of Director Anderson. I think it is absolutely incumbent upon us, if a person requests a mail-in ballot, that they be able to get one. And for whatever reason, they're going to be away, they're in the hospital, they're too far out, the weather is bad, blah, 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 all those different things. Option A still gives them that ability to do that. And it doesn't wholesale pass out ballots, which, I have never thought that we have ever done that. I always thought that it was a request. You had to request a mail-in ballot. So maybe I've been completely wrong all these years, but that was my assumption. And my assumption now is that that's going to be taken away from people, which is going to eliminate the absolute, God-given right of people to have a vote in an election if they can't do it other than mail-in.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't see how anybody could vote for option B.
Okay, thank you. Director Wally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Although I would agree theoretically with Director Abram, in my opinion, many of these elections are close when there's several candidates. A small bit of electoral fraud can definitely change the outcome of an election. So in my opinion, I think it's more important to have integrity than it is to have mail-in ballots. And the reason for this is there is many other opportunities for people to vote because there's a variety of early election dates or early voting dates that people can take advantage of if they really want to. Thank you.
Thank you. I got Director Moglove, Baker, and Evans. Director Moglove.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be voting against option B. I agree with the comments of Director Anderson and Director Abram. And I think that when you weigh the taking away of the ability of people to vote versus the, in my opinion, very small possibility of fraud, and when you take a look at the actual total number of mail ballot applications that we have had, or that the SRD's had over the last 3 opportunities, which is very, very small, 39 applications in 2014, 70 in 2018, and 35 in 2018 for the assent voting. It's really very, very small, and I would be shocked if it would be increased significantly if we open it up as option A would allow it. I think taking away a person's right to vote, and this is what would happen, because there are times when someone will be away for the entire voting period. I know people have been away, and it takes away their right to vote. And I think dealing with the aspect, the small possibility of some fraud or whatever, that can be looked at, but absolutely think that option B is not the way to go. Thank you.
Cool. And Director Baker.
I understand, excuse me, the concern that Director Molkoff has and Director Abrams and Noble. But until the federal government comes with a more secure program and mail out ballots so we can eliminate election fraud in smaller municipalities, such as the one I'm in, 1 or 2 votes could make the difference completely on what happens in scope of the election. So I would support option B. Thank you.
Cool. And Director Evans.
Thank you. And I, as well, will not be voting in favor of option B. Not only do I have concerns about the ability for people to be able to exercise their right to vote, but I also think that during the last election, there was an opportunity for people who felt uncomfortable because of COVID that wanted the option to not go to the polling stations. And I'm suggesting that some of those concerns may be the reason why people may want to request a mail-in ballot. I also understand that a mail-in ballot, once you request that, you are not able to vote in person. So I do think there is the opportunity to mitigate some concerns about there being potential for fraud, because once that mail-in ballot is there, even if you choose not to mail it in, you are not able then to go and vote in person. So I think that also provides that, again, just mitigates some of the risk. So I think there is, again, if we're looking at weighing the two, there is absolutely, in my opinion, the right for everyone to have the opportunity to vote, and just closing down mail-in ballots excludes that opportunity. I don't support it at all.
Okay, thank you. Any other first-time speakers? If not, I'll go to Director Anderson. Director Anderson.
Apologies, that was my hand not taken down from before.
Thank you. Okay. Don't see any other hands up. Director Wally and Director Baker, Director Lee, your hands have been up for a while. You didn't
put it up again.
I'm sorry.
I have a question, if you're ready. Do we not have the opportunity to have advance votes? Like, are there not more than one opportunity to vote on a at a poll? Do we have, you know, an advance vote and then the regular voting time? And can you not register at the polls? I mean, there is, in my opinion, a vast problem with just sending out bulk mail ballots. You know, I heard that there was a lot of them sent to Cortes Island and distributed, and you know, you don't know who the person might have been that was distributing it, if it was a candidate, if that's fair, and nobody can scrutinize those mail-in ballots when they come in to make sure that they were indeed qualified, that they were Canadian citizens over 18, that they did indeed live in that rural area. And I think there's so much problem with mail-out ballots. Plus, people get sent mail-out ballots in the last election up to Fort McMurray where they're working or whatever, and they just, you know, some of them can get them back in time and some can't because of the mail. And so then you're sort of skewing the result that way as well. So I think people should make an effort to get up out of their chairs, out from under their televisions, and go and vote in person. That's what, to me, voting is all about. So I'm choosing option B.
Cool. And Director Abram to finish off.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to thank Director Evans for bringing up a very important point. I don't know how many of you watched Bonnie Henry yesterday, Adrian Dix talking about Dr. Fauci from the States, Dr. Tam from Eastern Canada, and Bonnie Henry, all of them saying that first of all, the numbers are going up for COVID, and the fear and all of the possible restrictions are possibly coming back in the fall with influenza season. Well, that's right when our voting will be taking place. And they are saying that, this is a reality. This is not just guesswork. This is based on science, and it's most likely going to be a not very comfortable situation for many, many people. People are not turning up for public hearings, are not turning up for different events because of the fear of COVID and the fact that there are no restrictions right now. And, we're not even masking, we're not even social distancing. None of those things are happening at the local government level. So at the polls, they certainly won't be happening. And I think it's very important that we keep that in mind and make it available for people to be able to overcome their fear by sending in a mail-in ballot. The Director Moglove made some very good points also, but I just, hope that our board will be wise enough to realize that option B is just not on. The likelihood of voter fraud is so small in any of these, even in the one that Director Baker brought up, in the small communities, et cetera, et cetera. That can happen at a polling station. It doesn't have to be a mail-in ballot. So I certainly am going to support option A.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to call question on the motion. And right now, the option is option B. Anyone opposed?
Pull the board, please.
Okay,
Pull the board, please.
let's just pull it. Maybe I should go the other way. Is anybody in favor of it?
Lee?
Wally's in favor.
Baker.
Adams.
Lee and Wally,
Baker.
Adams.
Baker, Adams. That's it? Only,
Okay, I'd move option A.
Second.
hang on. Okay, so let's just do poll vote.
You only had 4.
I just called the poll vote, okay? Thank you,
I
Thank
asked
you.
that before. And
thank you. Director Baker,
Not in favor of A.
no, we're on B.
We're voting
Sorry.
on
We're on
B.
B.
Sorry, I apologize. I support B.
Okay, Adams,
In favor.
Moglove,
Opposed?
Evans,
Opposed.
Jules,
Opposed?
Wally,
In favor.
Abram,
opposed to B.
Lee,
In favor.
Colburn, oh, I saw seen her come on, okay. Davis,
Opposed?
did I miss anybody? Anderson,
Yes.
Anderson opposed.
Kerr opposed.
Kerr opposed. Davis is opposed. Director Cornfield's not there and Director Coleman's not there. In favor? Okay. So 2. So it's opposed. Okay, so we're back to square one.
I'll move option A.
Move option A.
Second.
Director Evans, Director Abram. Any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried.
I'm opposed. I'm
Baker's
opposed.
opposed.
I'm opposed.
Baker, Lee,
Wally,
Wally. Okay, next item, public notice requirements, altered methods. Motion to receive the report from CO.
Move receipt.
Second.
Evans and Adams and the CO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom will speak to this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this report is a follow-up to the report previously reviewed by the board, basically looking at the alternatives to newspaper publishing as the primary source of disseminating information to the public with respect to upcoming hearings and other decisions of the board. And the report outlines there's really, in our situation, we believe as staff, only one alternative means, and that would be through the regional district's website. So we're asking the board to consider as a method for not just saving some public money, but also to be more efficient in terms of how we reach the public with respect to these matters. Thank you.
Thank you. And discussion. Director Evans.
Yes, I'd like to recuse myself as my son-in-law is a publisher with Black Press.
Go. So I've got
We've lost volume.
Director Evans has left the room in conflict. So I've got Director Lee, Adams, Abram, and Wally. Director Lee.
Yes, I prefer that we continue to use our print media primarily and the public notice boards on the website secondarily. There's too many people that are not online. They don't have devices. They can't look at the website. And, you know, people that are older or people who live in Oyster River, Oyster Bay that don't get good signals. We need to advertise in the newspapers. People out in my area, 5,000 people, we do read the Mirror. So people pick it up and read it. So I think we should stick with what we know.
Okay, thank you. Director Adams.
Thank you. And just for clarification from staff, and then I do have another comment to make. There still will be advertising in the paper. It will just be reduced, directing people to the website. Is that not correct?
I'll go staff.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, essentially, we would foresee perhaps 50% of the current advertising that we do through the newspaper would be the future mode if the board decides to move in that direction.
Thank you. That was how I read the report, and I want to commend Mr. Yates for the report itself. I do want to comment, Mr. Chair, on some comments that Director Abram made in the last item that I take offense to. And while I appreciate that each member of the board as directors have their right to their opinion, to make statements that if you are not voting the way a certain director is, then you are unwise, is offensive and completely inappropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Director Abram.
Boy, hard act to follow. I didn't mean to offend anybody. The point I was making is that I'm hoping all directors will vote for whatever it was, A. But on this point, I'm not sure I understood Director Adams at all. He said this is to reduce the amount of newspaper advertising. Reduce in the way of what? Reduce it in the number of column inches or reduce it by not advertising? Because if that's the case, no, I'm not in favor of it. Option B, which, you know, the idea is for the regional district to reach as many people as possible. Well, you're not going to do that on the SRD website for some of the reasons that Director Lee mentioned. We have exactly the same reasons out here. People just don't have internet. So it's not that they don't have a device, they don't have an internet. So how are they going to access the SRD site or any kind of notice that's put out there? They do have access to print copy, whether it be the Mirror or whether it be the Discovery Islander, if possible. In other areas, I believe there's other papers. Cortez has papers. So I think the tried and true is the way to go with the internet as a fallback. You do both. What's wrong with it? Doesn't cost you very much for a staff person to put the notice on the website. It's a matter of just making a post. And that would cover anybody that wants to look at the website or can look at the website. But the others that can't, we don't even get the Mirror over here, the print copy of the Mirror. It's no longer delivered to Quadra Island or the outer islands. So nobody would get notified in that, situation if you don't move over to the papers that are local.
Okay, thank you. Director Wally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the Saywood Valley, we have no publications delivered, period. So that method has never worked. However, not everybody has access to the internet as well. So my suggestion is that we go ahead with both of those and we'll get more people that way.
Thank you. Director Anderson.
Here.
Thank you. I guess I'm basically echoing what Director Wally said, and I'm looking for perhaps just a little bit more fleshing out from staff. I certainly don't mind the regional district website being a place where most people are pointed to get more information. I don't mind there being a little bit less of like bylaw number, that most citizens don't much care about. But I do think it is really critically important that we continue to let people know via the multitude of print and also community websites and the various ways that the regional district has been reaching out to continue to do that. So I guess I'm just looking for clarity from staff about how much paring back is being recommended here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll go staff.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, if I may, when we talk about using newspaper as the primary source for public notification, under the Local Government Act, the legal requirement is that a newspaper must be published at least weekly, and we must have 2 consecutive insertions in alternate weeks. So it's a fairly high standard, and most local community newsletters, such as they have on Cortez, for example, just do not meet the definition of newspaper publication. So we do tend to rely on the Campbell River Mirror as the primary source simply to meet the legal requirements for public notification. We do, as a matter of course, also use a website. We also use community bulletin boards, community newsletters where they're available and timely. We do like to use all of those things, but not necessarily to meet the legal requirements that the statute imposes.
And so I am in totally supportive of that in terms of changing the legal requirements, as long as we can somehow embed in the bylaw, I would hope, a commitment to continue to use those alternative sources as much as we can. Thank you.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, I think we're singing from the same song sheet here. Is what Tom's explained is instead of advertising in 2 consecutive issues of the newspaper, we would use our website and other social media as primary source and advertise once. So when we talk about a reduction, it's in essence, instead of putting 2 ads in, putting 1 ad. So our primary would be our website, and we would still publish in the newspaper. media such as the Discovery Islander and whatever's on Cortez would not meet the definition and does not, and we do not use that. But let's think in terms, I think we're all speaking about the same thing, reducing the number of ads in the newspaper in essence by half and substituting that with our own website and social media.
Thank you. And Director Baker.
I agree with what Dave just said. And I mean, in terms of connectivity or people not having access to internet, that's going to be a problem that's going to be resolved shortly. To reduce and use our primary source as our website and the backup being print, I think covers everything we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further? Director Abram, do you have something new?
We lost you, Mark.
Yeah, we're still on stage. So I got first time speaker, Director Davis.
Yeah, I know for TASIS, we don't receive newspapers here, and it's kind of irrelevant to the discussion. Probably in our community, we have about 70% that access websites. So for us, certainly option A is the best. So I just wanted to make that comment.
So I have second time speaker, Director Abram, Director Lee, with new information. Director Abram.
Yeah, just I wanted to echo part of what Director Anderson had to say, which was fine, do it on the website, do it in your Mirror newspaper for one of the ads, but is there any reason why you would, if you're going to do it on the website, why couldn't you also do it on the websites for like the Discovery Islander, the Bird's Eye, the Surge Currents, the Cortez, I'm not sure what the name of it is.
Right.
Why couldn't those also be just on the fan out? To advertisement, doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost you anything.
Okay, more stuff.
Well, Mr. Chair, so the newspaper ad costs us money, and that's a legislative requirement, legal requirement. So we put the ad in the newspaper and we put it on our website. I'm not sure. Now, there's many organizations and almost all news media that they're a follower of ours and all kinds of local governments. So there'd be no need to fan out. They would get alerts on items that we put on our website. So you put it on your website, that basically fans out to those that are following you, which, I have to assume other media outlets do that.
Well, with all this talk of transparency all these years, last few years anyway, transparency, and here we are becoming less transparent.
We're not being less transparent.
Well, certainly we are. We're not reaching out to the entire public. No. We're only reaching out to a select few.
No, we're not. As the CEO just said, and we do the same thing in Gold River, Director Abram. We put it on our webpage and our website. We don't put it out to all the small news people or the what they call it, the gold in Gold River. If he wants it, he can take it off our website. So the information's out there. We're not being any less transparent.
Just to hopefully finish off on that, whenever we put anything on our website, we almost immediately get pinged by all the media asking for clarification, response, interview, whatnot. So in fact, it's a way to fan out to more people. If you just stick to the newspaper, as we've heard a lot of people don't get it, a lot of people don't read it. If you use social media and the websites, you're going to reach a lot more people and more news agencies.
Okay, so Director Lee, you have your hand up, or is that now or before?
It's new. I have a question through you to our corporate officer. So if we did nothing but receive this report, would things stay the same? Would we still get our 2 newspaper ads for public hearings and whatnot? Because I think it's important to reach out through the Mirror in Area D. We have 5,000 people. They do rely on the Mirror. They do read the Mirror, and a lot of them are not able to connect with online. So, or they don't have devices. So why can't we just carry on the way we always have been and make sure people know? Because the number one complaint that I hear at meetings in Area D was that the regional district did not let them know the meeting was going to happen. They just accidentally heard it from a neighbor or something, and they need to be informed. We need to be visible. We are invisible.
So, Mr. Chairman, to answer the question, if the board does nothing but receive this report, we will continue on as we always have, which is to use the newspaper as the sole or the primary source for informing the public, to continue using our website to do that, to also use community newspapers, community newsletters where we can and where the timing of that is appropriate. But in terms of meeting the legal requirement, we would have to rely solely on the newspaper, the Campbell River Mirror, which is the only publication, as far as I'm aware, that meets the requirements for legal notices in this region. And many communities, as we've heard, do not even receive that paper. So there you are.
Well, I'm in favor of the status quo.
Okay, I'm going to call a question on receipt. Anyone opposed? Carried. And do we have a resolution for option A or B?
Yeah, I'd like to move status quo.
Second.
That's B. Okay, so you're moving option B.
No, actually, you just explained it to be more than option B. You explained it to be
That's what he
option B plus the SRD website and community newspapers where appropriate, if it met timing. But it would not be the actual legal notice. It would just be notification. And that's what I'm favoring.
Apologize.
So that's status quo.
Yeah, Chair, I apologize if we didn't make it clear. Option B is status quo. Option A is using the website as the primary source, so.
So you're moving option B.
Okay, so I'll move option B then.
Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed?
Mo Glove, I'm opposed.
Baker's opposed.
Mo Glove's
Adams
opposed.
opposed.
Adams opposed.
Baker's
opposed.
Baker's opposed.
Davis.
Wally's opposed. Hunger's opposed.
Davis opposed.
Davis opposed. 2, 4, 6 out of 11. So it's failed. 11 because Director Evans excused herself, so there's only 11 voting on this item.
Move A.
Second, Mo Glove.
Moved A by Director Davis, second by Director Moglove. Call questions. Anyone opposed?
Lee.
Abram.
Lee and Abram. Carried. Next item. Item 3, Regional Governance and Reconciliation. Motion to receive the report.
My receipt.
And NCO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the First Nations Relations Committee, we brought a draft letter forward, and we had a lot of wholesome discussion at there. Hopefully, staff have captured the discussion of that committee, and we were instructed to make those changes and bring the letter forward, and happy to answer any questions.
On receipt, any questions? Director Adams. You're muted, Andy.
Just a comment. Want to thank staff for a great letter. Really well done. And kind of double up here. Just ask the question: if we do go with this, do we have enough room in the boardroom?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have discussed it, and we've ordered additional infrastructure, if you will, or we'll be planning on it. But I do think we have enough room here, yes.
Okay, thank you. And Director Wally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for staff. What is the difference between sitting at the board table as an observer and sitting in the gallery in the audience as an observer? I don't understand the significance of the difference.
I would say the significance is participating in the discussion. Certainly in the gallery, in our procedures bylaw, we don't allow discussion with the audience, if you will. Sometimes we'll ask a question, but I think it's participating in the discussions of the reports.
I understand. And one more question. What about in camera? Would they be absent from that or present?
Absent.
Thank you.
Director Abram.
Yes, thank you. I thought the letter you wrote was excellent, or staff wrote. It said everything that needed to be said. But when you get down to participate as observers, I believe that is incorrect. It should be attend as observers, and this goes to the point of, are they at the table or are they in the gallery? When we did this exact same thing at the CSRD, and we put out that broad invitation to all First Nations, and we did get a couple replies, people that came. The intent was that they could come to the meetings to observe the proceedings, and if there was a need to speak, they could, put their hand up and come to the table and speak. But to have them at the table is just almost like having them as directors. And I don't believe that was the intention of this entire item. It was a matter of extending an invitation for them to attend the meetings and find out about local government and tell us about their government if necessary.
Okay.
But it was not, the letter is clear. It does not say participate. It says attend.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd happy to receive the input from other directors and especially Director Jules, but in my mind, it is participation. That's an action verb. It's not to sit at the table, but it's to participate in discussions. But again, happy to make modifications as per the board's direction.
Cool. I don't see any further hands up. Oh, Director Jules.
Yeah, I sat at the table as an observer for quite a lengthy time, and I was a part of the discussions as well that I needed to be a part of, and that's just how I see. That's how I see it. That's how it was. That's how it was for me as an observer. I came and sat at the table, and yeah. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So on receipt, I'll call question. Anyone opposed? Seeing none carried. So we have item B, the draft letter from Chair Unger to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs regarding regional governance and reconciliation be approved.
I'll move B, that's Moglove.
Moglove, seconder.
Second.
Adams. Any discussion? Oh, anyone opposed? Carried. And C, invitation to be extended to First Nations in the regional district to participate as observers at board meetings.
So moved.
Evans and Adams. Any discussion? Director Wally, I see your hand go up.
Thank you. Yes, I had understood in the past that the participation at the board and observer was for those First Nations that were in the treaty process and we're nearing their completion of that treaty and would shortly be full members of the board, and that was the whole purpose of it. But for those who aren't or aren't even considering it, the treaty process, I think it's inappropriate.
Cool. Any further discussion? Call question. Is anyone opposed?
Wally's opposed.
Abram,
Wally and Abram. Carried. Item 4, 2021 financial statement audit findings. Motion to receive the report.
Move receipt.
Director Lee, seconder.
Second Baker.
Director Baker, I think it was. And I go CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pass it over to Mike to say a few words.
Cool.
Thanks. So with this report, we're seeking the board's approval for the SRD's 2021 comprehensive financial statement package. This package includes both the audited financial statements and the statement of information, commonly referred to as the SOFI report. We have legislative requirements to file these soon, with the financial statements being due on Monday and the SOFI being due later in June. Briefly, I'll just say the audit went quite well for this year, and we have Corey Vanderhorst from MMP here to offer a short presentation on them. So I'll hold off on any the detailed commentary, but I just wanted to say I'm available anytime if the directors or member of the public ever have any questions, so please reach out. Before passing it over to Corey, I'll just make one high-level comment on the surpluses. We tend to get that every year from the public. So we produce a statement called Statement B, the Statement of Operations. It looks eerily similar to a income statement or a profit and loss, but the number at the bottom shouldn't be confused with profit or like freely available cash. It's more akin to a change of equity. This year we have a relatively high surplus number of 11 million. 7.6 of that is actually just related to Connected Coast, where we received the government grant funding to build the asset. So, a lot of that funds have already been spent on, fiber, work crews, and equipment, but you don't see the related expense till we start operating it. So I just wanted to clear that up. But again, if anyone has any questions, please get in touch with me. I'll pass it over to Corey.
Okay, so before we go there, we've got to receive the report. So a motion to receive the report. Sorry, we already did that.
Move
Yeah.
receipt.
On the floor.
I
So,
already moved that.
okay, I'm going to call question on receipt. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. And then we have option B, if the board wishes, that Corey Vendors from MNP join us.
So moved.
Director Wally,
Second.
Director Lee, thank you. And welcome, Corey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the board. Bear with me for 1 second as I get some technical up and running. I'm hoping you can all see my first slide now.
Yes, we're good to go.
Great, thank you very much. I just want to say to you, I've had some technical difficulties in the last week or two. If my audio cuts out, please let me know. I can see Director Abrams, Mayor Adams, and Director Lee. Any one of the three, wave at me if you can't hear me. Thank you. So I thank you, Mike, for the introduction, and I will turn around with the thank you to Mike and the staff at the Regional District for working with us on the audit this year. It goes very smoothly. We're very happy to work with the finance team and the whole team at the Regional District. I do have a presentation for you that I will go through. I'll try to keep it quick and to the point, and I would be happy to answer questions at the end. So I'll look at the financial statements for 2021, and then I'll talk a little bit about the audit and the audit process to wrap up. I believe you do have a copy of your full financial statements in your agenda packages, but the highlights, starting with the statement of financial position, or we used to call the balance sheet. You can see for 2021, the Regional District had cash balances at the end of the year of 28.3 million. When you add the cash and receivables and other financial assets, $45.8 million at the end of 2021. The regional district's own debt is just over $2 million. So again, I've carved out and taken off the member municipality debt because that is also represented in the regional district's financials, but this is just for the RD. And the total liabilities, so including payables and other long-term benefits and things that are accrued in the financial statements, total liabilities of $21.9 million. So if you take that 21.9 total liabilities and subtract it from the 45.8 of total financial assets, you get what we call the net financial asset position of $23.9 million. Tangible capital assets, so the infrastructure being managed by the regional district, has increased from 25 to 33 million. As Mike previously mentioned, the biggest increase there being the Connected Coast Broadband Project and cost incurred in 2020. Accumulated surplus for the regional district is $57.5 million at the end of the year, and I'll get into that number in a future slide. Looking then at the income statement or the statement of operations, total revenues for the year of $26.7 million, an increase of about $6.5 million, most of that being grant funding for the Connected Coast project. Total expenses of $15.6 million, and an accounting basis surplus of $11 million for 2021. As was mentioned, that surplus looks large because that doesn't include the capital spend for Connected Coast. So it's important to look at the cash flow statement. This is more in line with how you're thinking when you're doing your budgeting process. This is looking at the main bank accounts and what went in and out. So operations at the regional district had a cash inflow of 12.6, and the large Connected Coast grants are in there. $9 million spent on infrastructure and capital assets, most of that being Connected Coast. Debt being repaid on schedule of $53,649, and so a net cash inflow to the main bank accounts of $3.5 million, fairly consistent with the prior year's 3.3. The final slide for the financial statements, the total accumulated surplus of $57.4 million. The vast majority of that is what we call the equity and tangible capital assets. So $31.3 million is the amounts invested in physical assets, things that you can touch. And then you've got $122,000 in some capital funds, $2.4 million in appropriated surplus, so set aside for future projects, and another $19.1 million in reserves for future projects and future expenditures. The operating fund had a small increase year over year to $4.3 million. Shifting gears a little bit into the audit and the exciting world of audit reporting. Happy to be able to provide an unmodified opinion for the regional district again this year. So that is what we call a clean audit opinion. We are satisfied that the financial statements that you have in front of you today are prepared in all material respects in accordance with the appropriate accounting standards for local government. Ready to sign the report, the last step being board approval here at the meeting today. When we do our audit, we look at the controls in place at the regional district to make sure you're getting accurate financial reporting, your assets are being safeguarded, and there's appropriate risk management in the finance department. Then we sample transactions throughout the year. We don't look at every transaction. So to drive our audit testing, we use this materiality number of $1 million. That's calculated as a percentage of your annual revenue. We look at every transaction that's larger than that $1 million mark, and then we sample underneath. So because of the nature of that number at $1 million, the big transactions we're looking at are the capital project and the large grant funding that's coming through, and the requisition from the community. In our engagement status, we did not find any irregularities or any unusual conflict of interest or related party transactions. We are not specifically fraud investigators when we're doing a financial statement audit, but if something came to our attention, they would be required to report it out to the board, and they would, of course, ask for an in-camera session to do that reporting. So I don't have anything to report for 2021. Thank you again to staff in the finance department and throughout the regional district for all their help with the audit this year. I will confirm that MMP is independent of the regional district. We didn't do any other projects or any other work throughout 2021 and through to today, May 11th. And the last two slides, I'll go back into the numbers a little bit. And instead of looking just at 2021, we like to look at the last 4 or 5 years and see if there's any trends or ratios that would give an indicator of where the finances have been going and maybe where they're heading. So the first ratio that we look at is what we call a sustainability ratio. It's a rough liquidity measure. We're looking at the amount of financial assets, so cash and receivables that you can turn into cash, and we compare it to the liabilities. So this ratio here, we're looking for the magic number of 1. If this number is above 1, it means you have cash and investments available to pay for future projects. If it dips below 1, it means you are taxing or raising user fees or other sources of funding to pay for the past. So the good result here for the Regional District is that this number has been consistent for the last 2 years at 2.09. The other area we like to look at, we call a flexibility indicator. Here we're looking at the infrastructure being managed by the Regional District and looking at a rough aging of that assets. We compare the depreciated value to the original cost to see if the assets are aging faster than maintenance and replacement has been happening. So for Strathcona Regional District, the ratio for 2021 is 62.5%. That is an increase from the prior year's 57.4%. And this ratio has been trending steadily upwards from 53% in 2018. So you can see almost a 10% jump, representing significant capital infrastructure investment and capital projects over the last 4 to 5 years. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. I will turn off the slideshow and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, open for questions. Director Evans.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question around materiality. Was the $1 million this year higher or lower than last year's?
Thank you, Director Evans. A good question. Off the top of my head, I believe it's either slightly higher or the same. I apologize, I don't have the answer in front of me. One of the things that we do is, even though you have an increase in revenues for the year, we do something called normalizing that out. So we adjust out some of those increasing grant funds and try to get to a normal year where you don't have fluctuations from those large grants. What that does is it keeps the materiality flat and doesn't have major fluctuations year over year. Apologies, I don't have the number in front of me at hand.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Mogul.
Thanks, and thanks very much for your presentation. My question relates to the materiality as well, but more to do with the sampling that is done below that materiality number. And I just wanted, maybe if you could elaborate a little bit more on how much sampling you do, and is it sort of done per service, or, you know, how is that sampling done?
Thank you, Director. Great questions. So first thing that we do with that materiality number is we drop it down to about 90%, so to $900,000, to give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room in if we find anything. And then we take that number and we apply risk to, or risk judgments to the different areas of the financial statements. And we use those risks to drive how much testing we're going to do. So for example, for the Regional District, we spend more time in revenues, in deferred revenue, and in some of the capital assets. We spend less time in the regular expenses and in some of the like cash and other accounts that are easily tied into bank statements and investment statements. So with those risk assessments, that then drives the amount of work. So we would do, for example, 3 times as much work in the revenue and the deferred revenue as we would do in the regular expenses. Hopefully that does answer your question. And sorry, to the previous question, I do actually have the answer to that one. So maybe I'll, the materiality for the 2020 audit was $750,000, and for 2021 was $1 million. So we did increase $250,000 year over year.
Thank you for getting that number back. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more question, if I might, Mr. Chair.
Yep, go ahead.
So my second question relates to the last 2 slides that you presented, those ratios, which then gives the board a sense of how we're doing financially. It's my I don't, maybe I missed it, but I don't see it actually in the report, those ratios. And the other thing, my recollection is, years ago, maybe even going back 10 years, there was a series of maybe 8 to 10 of those types of ratios, which would basically, from my point of view, tell the board how we're doing. And like that first one you talked about, the number we're looking for is 1, and we're at 2.09. And then there would be the sort of trending. And that, to me, was really important, because the actual bald numbers, so to speak, don't necessarily tell me as a board member it's where we should be in relation to, good financial practices. So I'm wondering whatever happened to those other indices that if you recall what I'm talking about. And the other, related to that, when you presented to the city a couple of days ago, there wasn't any of these ratios talked about. So I'm just sort of curious what your thought is on those markers, those indices, and those ratios.
Thank you, Director. It's a great question. Yes, and you're right. If you go back to, I think it's maybe only 5 or so years ago, we were looking at 7 or 8 of those in a lot more detail. I have trimmed down the presentation for time and clarity, but those ratios are there. We have calculated them. I would be happy to provide staff with the full rundown and a report that the staff could bring back for the next meeting, which shows some of those amounts. With respect to the question of city not having any of that analysis and having it here, every finance department and every community that I work with is different in terms of what type of questions that we or what not questions, what type of presentation and information is provided. So I am happy to add to the presentation for the board and make sure that some of those things get added back for future years. But I'm also happy to commit to providing a document that can come back to the board that shows more of those ratios and analysis.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Director Abram, is your hand up for this?
No, it's not.
Thank you. Any further questions then? Seeing none, on receipt of Corey's report, anyone
Move
opposed?
receipt.
We've already done, I'm just calling questions. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. And there's an option to go into closed. Is there any reason to go into closed? Seeing none. And Director Mulgrove.
Move D.
I think we have to move D first,
Okay,
and I'll have a
Move D.
subsequent.
we'll move D. Director
Move D.
Lee, second by
Wally.
Director Wally. Any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. And Director Mulgrove?
Yes, thank you. And I had a subsequent that I sent into Edie earlier today. I'll wait for it to bring it. Okay. And so my motion is that staff bring back a report to the board detailing the variances in the director's remuneration. Second. Thanks. If I might speak to this, when I was reading the report, it occurred to me that there's a significant difference amongst directors, and I'm talking amongst municipal directors as a group and as among electoral area directors as a group in terms of remuneration. And I think for the sake of transparency, in particular to the public, that we have more of an explanation as to how that comes to be. So in particular, on the remuneration side, I think it's basically, at some point, I would love to see a breakdown of what is the regular stipend for directors and what are the meeting fees that have been incurred. So I just think having more detail on this type of, the breakdown would really help me as a director understand. And if directors may recall, when we changed our remuneration bylaw a few years ago, there was a fair bit of discussion on what would constitute a meeting. And so I think that I think having this kind of breakdown would help us focus on as to whether we might want to make any changes to that again or to tie it down a bit more. So that's the motion, just to, elaborate on the remuneration and break it down a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. Under bylaws, first bylaw, bylaw 9495 OCP rezoning, Shellneck. Motion to receive the report.
Motion to receive.
Evans and Abram and CO.
Abram.
Yes, I got you, Director Abram.
Nothing from staff, Mr. Chair.
Okay, on receipt. Call questions. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. Item B.
I have a subsequent motion, Madam, Mr. Chair, before we go to B.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, this is the one I talked to you about yesterday. This item the simple motion is that this item be referred to the June 15th board meeting.
Second.
June 15th, moved by Director Abram, second by Wally. And Director Abram. Deferred or referred?
Referred.
Okay. Okay,
Well, I don't know. I mean, what's the difference? Deferred. I'm saying I would like to deal with it at the June 15th meeting. So pick your word.
Mr. Chairman, I
I'm not-
believe deferred or postponed would be correct.
Okay, we'll go with that.
so then a deferred motion is time and place. No discussion?
I do have my hand up.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Just to time, I really appreciate having a bit more time because I've not got through all the material, but I'm just wondering why not 2 weeks from now, the next board meeting?
I guess just Director Abram picked June 15th. Director Abram?
I picked June 15th because that's about what you're concerned about time, but if you've looked at the materials, you have 2 3-inch binders to go through, which I was told was around 600 pages. And I have gotten through very few. I know the other directors, it's the same, except I haven't heard from you. And it is our legal responsibility under the Act to consider all submissions prior to making a decision. So I'm assuming that we're going to need that amount of time to fit it in between all of the other things that we have to do. We only received this a very short time ago, and we need time to read the comments. So the directors are not ready.
Okay, thank you. Director Lee?
Yes, I was going to suggest June 29th because the last board meeting of June, I noted that Capital Regional District had over 2,000 pages of submissions on one of their issues, and they gave everyone like 6 weeks to read through, and the public, it's also the public that wants to see these public records, not just directors. They get to examine what's been submitted, and so I would like it to be June 29th in keeping with what other local governments are allowing when they have more than 2,000 pages of written submissions.
Okay, well.
But I'll go with the 15th or the 15th if that's what Director Abram wants. I'll just have to do some speed reading.
Okay, thank you. Any other further discussion on it? So this should be just electoral areas only? Electoral areas only. Call question. Anyone opposed? Carried. June 15th. Next item, bylaw.
Thank you.
Bylaw 457, Oyster River Flood Protection Service. Motion to receive the report.
Move receipt.
Director Lee.
Second.
Wally. CO.
Nothing to add from staff, Mr. Chair?
Thank you. On receipt, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed? Seeing none carried. Item B, that structural response form attached to the May 6, 2022 report from the CEO be approved for the alternative approval process for bylaw 457.
Move B.
Second.
Lee and Wally, any discussion?
I would just like to say something, Mr. Chair. This is in my area. And the maximum requisition is less than 3 cents per thousand of assessed value. So on an average home of $683,000 in Area D, it would cost people approximately $18.44, which is pretty negligible considering the amount of emergency protection they'll get from this bylaw.
Okay, thank you. So all directors vote. Call questions. Anyone opposed? Seeing none carried. Item C,
Move C.
Director Lee, second.
Second.
Wally, any discussion? Call question. Anyone opposed? Carried. And item D, deadline submission be Monday,
move
July
D.
the 4th. Director Lee.
Move D.
Second.
Wally, any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. Item 3, bylaw 458, Quadra Island rezoning, Turks Job. Motion to receive the report.
So moved, Abram.
Keel, seconder.
Second.
Wally, CO.
Nothing from staff, Mr. Chair?
On receipt, I'll call question. Anyone opposed? Seeing none carried. Item B, report for the public hearing.
Item B,
bylaw.
I would move B, but I have some comments if I could.
Okay, move B, second by Wally. Director Abram.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I would like to support this application. I do support this application, but before final adoption, I'd like to see a report from the Minister of Environment or a professional biologist regarding the possible impacts, of any, to surrounding properties and the environment. This comes from the public hearing, the comments made there by adjacent landowners. And there's concern that there could be problems with wetlands, waterways, water availability, et cetera. So since we don't have that information, I think we need it. What I will do later is just ask for third and hold final. So
Okay, well, let's wait till then, okay?
that's fine.
Okay, so on B, anyone opposed? Seeing none carried. Item C for the third reading.
So moved, Abram.
Yep, second.
Second.
Wally. Call questions. Anyone opposed?
I'm opposed. If I could speak to that.
Director Lee's opposed for third reading.
Yes.
Okay,
I'm opposed to this bylaw based on the input from the public hearing.
okay. Cool. Everything is passed. So then item D,
Okay, excuse me,
Abram.
Mr. Chair, that was just a question, Mr. Chair.
go ahead.
So the vote on C was 2 in favor or 3 in favor? There were
Okay.
3 in favor,
Three in
okay.
favor. So
All
we're on,
right.
we're on to D now, and you have a subsequent.
All right, D, yes, I can just amend the one that's there.
Okay,
Bylaw number 458 being Quadra Island zoning bylaw, 1990, amendment 138, be now reconsidered. No, sorry. I guess we just don't move D, is that, I have to ask staff, what do I do?
that's up to you. You're
I
the,
don't want to do final adoption.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I believe Director Abram wishes to obtain additional information, if I understand. Now, of course, there are limits on what additional information can be sought or received by directors following the close of a public hearing. So until we hear the motion and understand its entirety and intent, I'm not sure we can really provide further advice on that particular issue.
So say that-
Okay, so I'd make the motion. I'll make the motion and see if it flies. The motion would be that I'd to ask staff to receive a report from Ministry of Environment or a professional biologist regarding the possible impacts, if any, to surrounding properties and the environment, and if necessary, report back to the directors. I believe that meets the qualifications for public hearing. It's going to staff, the information is going to staff, not the directors,
Mr. Yates,
unless they,
okay, so that's moved. Do I have a seconder? Okay, do I have?
I'll second for discussion.
Yep, and then I'll go to CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My only question in that is in the motion you say to report back if necessary. I'm not sure what necessary is.
well, the reason I said that was because it's my understanding that information after a public hearing can be given to staff, and staff can peruse it. And if they feel that the concerns that are reported back to them are substantive, that they can then bring it forward, which would precipitate another public hearing. If they don't feel that it's a concern, then they would just tell us that and we would move forward.
So that sounds.
Is that not correct?
Yeah, no, I understand your explanation. Those sounds very subjective for staff. Like, what would that be? So I'm concerned.
Well, if a,
I'm just.
if a professional,
I understand what you're saying, but what you may feel is a concern is different than what we would feel is a substantive concern. So, I mean, we just heard Director Lee.
no, I'm based,
Hang on, Director Abram, let him.
So, I mean, I just heard Director Lee vote against it based on what she heard from the public hearing. I think putting that subjective decision-making on staff is difficult.
okay, if I could, Mr. Chair, I'd just answer quickly. I don't believe the information that I'm asking for would be subjective. It would be proof of harm or in any way that staff would then either agree or disagree with. That's not subjective. That's based on objective professional biologist assessment or whatever.
Okay, so I got Director Anderson and Lees. Director Anderson.
Thank you. I think this is problematic for two reasons, and I appreciate the director's caution and wanting good information to make a good decision. And I don't have a problem with doing a second public hearing if need be, but I think problematic for two reasons is that the information that will be received from a biologist, what could it possibly say other than there will be impacts if this happens and less impacts if the other happens, and staff aren't in a decision-making position. And I think it would be very uncomfortable and professionally inappropriate to ask them to make that judgment call about whether they pass it on or not. And then secondly, which is related, is the impact will depend on what somebody does with the land. One can build a tiny little shack right up by the road, or one can, pave the whole thing. And that's up to the developer or the resident, because there's there's relatively limited restrictions on, tree cutting and various things that can be, ditching wetlands or what have you. So I don't know that the environmental concerns are really going to be addressed by zoning or subdivision, but rather by development. And so I think this is a bit of a red herring, unfortunately.
Cool. And Director Lee.
Thank you. Only two people spoke at this public hearing, the proponent and his next door neighbor who identified himself, Mr. Algar, as a professional biologist who worked in the field for numerous years. And he spoke to how wetlands are disappearing and they're very valued for our survival. And basically it's right next door to his property and he doesn't agree with building anything adjacent to the wetland that could affect that wetland. So in my opinion, we already had a biologist's opinion. And then the other thing was looking at the map for the subdivision. This is proposing to divide a piece in half, which would make that piece half the size of all the surrounding properties. And I think there's like references in Quadras OCP to having those parcels larger and consistent. And so this would be the Trojan horse busting up those larger parcels. But primarily hearing from the biologist who spoke at the hearing, I was moved to think that this is not a really good idea, putting housing into wetlands. I think maybe we need to really take a hard look at what we're doing to our environment.
Okay, Director Wally.
Yes, in my opinion, the dividing of the parcel to smaller size wasn't objected to by anyone at the public hearing, so I think that isn't a valid point. I basically agree with Nova and her assessment of this. The neighboring biologists did speak against it, but I don't concur that his opinions were scientifically valid in this case.
Okay. And Director Abraham, to wrap up, then I'm going to call question.
Yeah, I think if you had received the materials, I don't know if they were provided to all of the directors or not, but if you had received the materials that showed photographs of all of the property, you'd see that it is wetlands, it has been trenched, it's being drained, it's, you know, there's all kinds of things going on. And the reason that I suggested that it go to a professional biologist, I did not mean the neighbor. The neighbor is a professional biologist, and that's why I was seeking an independent professional biologist. Maybe I should have included that in my wording. Somebody else that could take a look at it, a hard look at it, and see if there is valid concern. If there's valid concern, then we deal with it. The staff tell us, yeah, there's valid concern, and we deal with it. The staff's comments to me were, when I brought this up to them, that the issues would be dealt with at subdivision and highways approval. Well, those are, you know, they're very cursory in their look at anything that has to do with anything other than, is the lot big enough? You know, can you drill for water? And then VHA, of course, would have to look at it to see if you could have a septic field. So those kinds of things, they may stop it dead in its tracks. I don't know. All I was asking for was to have another look at it, to be fair to the applicant and to be fair to the neighbor. You know, we don't have the firsthand information that those two people have, and that's what we heard at the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to call question on your motion.
Which
was what?
C, right?
No, you wrote it, Director Abraham. What was your motion?
Well, I asked the question of staff, if you recall, what is my motion? Because
it's your motion,
the
Director
item
Abraham.
D,
it's
I
your
know,
motion.
but if you'll let me finish, Mr. Chair, because of the way the motion is written that's there, D, I cannot move that. So my motion would be that before final adoption, that an independent report from the Ministry of Environment or a professional biologist, an independent professional biologist, regarding the possible impacts, if any, be assessed by staff. That would be my motion.
Okay, so,
Can I make an amendment to that motion?
okay, just hang tough for a sec, guys. This is the problem with motion on the fly. So here's the motion that staff have written down. The report for staff request from MOE for a professional biologist on the impacts of the surrounding properties and environment, and report back to directors if necessary. That's your motion. Moved by Director Abram, second by Director Lee. That's what you're voting
No,
on.
not me. I didn't second it.
Well,
no.
you did.
No, I'm voting against that.
You voted for discussion.
You
Oh,
voted, you voted.
I thought
on-
that was C. That was C though.
Okay, can we have some order here, please? Director Lee, you voted, you seconded for discussion.
I
So,
voted
so,
no on C.
so, the question is now.
I know how I voted.
Okay, so then the motion's not on the floor. You don't have a seconder then. Okay, we're back to D. Motion of bylaw 458 being plotted around the zoning bylaw 1990 amendment number 1338 now being reconsidered and finally passed and adopted.
So you as chair are reading that out. I don't hear anyone moving that.
I
I
read
would
it out, I'm waiting for a motion.
I would certainly support a motion if Director Abram wanted to make it that was as he made it before, but rather having that.
Point of order, there's no
information.
motion on the floor to speak to. There's no motion on the floor to speak to at the moment.
Okay, I'll make one. That a professional biologist be engaged to give us an independent opinion about the ecological viability of this proposal, and that report be brought back to directors for consideration.
Second.
And speaking to it, that will trigger a second public hearing, as I understand it, because it will be new information. I'm willing to do that. I share Director Lee's concerns and the concerns raised at the public hearing, but I don't think it's appropriate to put staff in the position of determining whether or not to share that with us. So I'm willing to trigger another public hearing if that's the way that Director Abram wants to go. Otherwise, I don't know if this will die now or not. Thank you.
Discussion, Director Abram.
Sorry, is my hand up?
Has been. Okay.
No, well, I screwed up.
Okay, thank you. Director Lee?
I think I would prefer to vote this down and then get the opinion and then go to another public hearing, because any new information we receive between now and final adoption of the bylaw is going to be legally challenging. I don't think it's a good idea I think we should vote this down as bylaw and then get that opinion. And then if the applicant wants to go back to public hearing, fine.
Mr. Yates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just for the board's information, there is a considerable amount of case law on the issue of information received following a public hearing. And technical information for the benefit of the board making a decision is typically going to be allowed without triggering another public hearing. Of course, the question is, to what extent is information going to be technical in nature versus opinion versus something else. So I think if the board wishes to get more information, staff would certainly seek that information, and then the decision can be made whether it's going to trigger another public hearing or not, based on what the information is, what it has to say, and whether that is, strictly speaking, technical in nature.
Okay, so we're very clear on the motion, correct? I'm going to call question.
I have a comment. I have a comment, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Sure. I'd just like to thank Mr. Yates for doing exactly what I was doing by bringing it forward in the manner I did. And he has just clarified what the case law and local government act tells us to do. And that's all I asked for. And I have been maligned continuously throughout this discussion for bringing it forward. So thank you, Mr. Yates. You got it right on the head. That's what I was asking for.
Question on the motion. Area directors only. All in favor?
Wally's opposed.
Well, in favor, if that's what you're asking, Anderson.
I'm asking who's opposed.
Wally's,
Lee and Wally is opposed? Failed. Back to the original. Do we have a motion for D?
So moved, because I think we need to deal with it one way or the other.
second.
Go. Gonna call question on D. Anyone opposed?
Lee. Anderson.
Abram.
Defeated.
Lee.
It's been defeated. You're done.
Oh, okay, good.
Go. Next report. Item number 4, bylaw 460, last mile broadband infrastructure. Motion to receive the report.
Move receipt.
Wally and
Second.
Evans. And
I have a
Theo
question.
on receipt?
I'll just speak to it if I can first.
On receipt?
Are you speaking to me?
You're the one asked for
Yeah,
question.
I'll wait. Okay, well, you didn't address me, so if I would prefer to hear from the CAO and then I'll ask my question.
If I may, Mr. Chair, then I would characterize this this bylaw as a bit of housekeeping. We had to make some amendments to the partnership agreement as per the build cost, specifically one in Tassus. That number does not change any of the borrowing or the implications or our partnership agreements. We just need to bring clarity to the build cost for the areas. This partnership agreement again addresses the 5% contribution from the communities and the dividend back. And the last piece is a housekeeping error on my part, is that we did not have one of the Quadra bylaw maps attached, and so the partnership agreement now is amended to include that portion that was excluded previously. Thanks.
Go on receipt. Questions? Question on receipt? Anyone opposed?
Yes, yes, Mr. Chair, I have put my hand up.
It's not up.
Well, why does it say, it says lower hand? I had it up.
God, really?
Oh gee, I'm so sorry,
On receipt.
Director Adams.
On receipt. Do you have a question?
On receipt.
Go ahead.
Yes, I do. The entire report talks about all of these different items that I've read thoroughly and understand, but I've also had conversations with Mr. Leach in the past week, and we've been talking about trying to up the numbers, which I have been doing continuously via Facebook and via Discovery Islander articles.
Director
I've even
Abram.
sent the articles.
Director Abram, sorry. What you're saying has got nothing to do with the last mile infrastructure.
Yes,
with
it
this
does.
report.
It has to do with I was told, if you'd let me finish, I was just getting to, Mr. Leach told me that unless we get our numbers up to 90%-ish, that Quadra would not be receiving internet. If that's the case, then are we going to be taken out of the borrowing bylaw? Because otherwise we would be getting nothing but paying for a considerable amount of infrastructure.
So just to bring.
So I'd like that answered.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just to bring some clarity of, this partnership agreement and the borrowing here is fully guaranteed by City West. So Quadra is never going to pay these amounts whether they receive broadband or not. As it pertains to the drop-in campaigns, in order to be a customer, you need to have a drop. So our current campaign right now is a goal of 90% drops and before we will begin construction. So on Quadra and the other 4 areas in here, we've individually identified the amounts of money to build that last mile. Unless we get to the 90% drop, we will not begin to build those, and therefore we will not borrow that money. So all this is a moot point if we don't get the drop signups. We're not going to begin construction, and we're not going to borrow the funds.
Thank you very much for very comprehensively answering my question, Dave.
Okay, so on receipt, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed? See none, carried. Director Anderson, you have a question?
I do, thank you. Sorry, this information about 90% sign up threshold is new to me. There was some significant sort of discrepancy here on Cortez around what that number was, and I don't know what it ended up landing at. I heard from City West before they started construction that it was very high, well over 90. And then when they got on the ground, it seemed to be from the manager that it was much less. And there was talk about, hiring somebody to help with the campaign as fiber was being laid to increase those numbers. I never got clarity on whether that happened or not, but I certainly didn't know that we needed 90 to begin. And so my question is, who made that decision, and do we have any influence over that decision? Because in my opinion, laying this fiber is still well worth it along all of the roadways. The actual drops are relatively cheap to do. Somebody can just go to City West, buy the cable, and run it through the Salal. I mean, that's happening a lot. It's not even getting buried in a lot of instances here. So I think that the fiber lay is this is what we've been at for a decade. So I'm quite alarmed and concerned by this 90% threshold. I'm wondering, where it comes from and how we can influence it.
Okay, well, I have good news for you. Cortez certainly doesn't need to be alarmed. Cortez is a glowing success story when it comes to the drops. We're actually over 100% drop. And the drop is bringing the fiber into your home. It's free for the customer. But in order to be a potential customer, you need to have the fiber drop. So what happens is you need to get 90% of the properties receiving the drop in order to be a potential customer. We're well over that. So what happens is, I think we're ironically over 100% on Cortez. So once you have those drops, we commit to building it, which we've done on Cortez. I think we're about 70% done. And then City West does boots on the ground and tries to get people to sign up to packages. So nothing to be alarmed out in Cortez. All the drops are paid for, the funding's there. There is no borrowing on Cortez at all. I would consider Cortez a Class A success template for the rest of the service areas.
Okay, thank you. So we're on item B, bylaw 460 being a bylaw authorized amendments to the capital financing agreements for broadband infrastructure being now introduced and read for the first time.
So moved.
Wally, seconder.
Second.
Adams. Any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. Item C, the rules be suspended for bylaw 460, be given second and third readings.
So I
Lee, and I didn't get the other one. Wally, thank you. Any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. Item D, bylaw 460 be returned for further consideration by the board following the conclusion of the public notification process. Motion
So
to
moved.
Wally, seconder. You seconder.
Second, Anderson.
Any discussion?
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Director Lee?
So in the public approval process, you would only need 80 people, no, 3,137 people, which is 50% plus one to object. So all those people in Area D and in Campbell River that are not benefiting by this service, that seems like, are they able to send in an alternate approval objection?
I'll go to the staff.
Mr. Chairman, that is not correct. There is no elector approval process. This is simply a requirement that the board advertise its intention and consider any feedback it receives. And so it'll be up to the board to decide if there are comments that will cause the board to reconsider where it's going with this. So it's not an elector approval process that the board will be embarking on. Thank you.
I thought it was alternate approval.
No, apparently not. Okay, so the motion on the floor has been moved and seconded. Call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. Correspondence, we have 4 items. Do we
Move all 4.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. No managers, no management. Dem and Nyman. Motion for the Dem and Nyman to be considered.
So moved.
Second.
Wally, sorry, Lee and Wally. Anyone opposed? Carried. So bylaw 44647, public hearing update, Oyster Bay Lands, CO report.
Move receipt.
Director Wally,
Second.
Lee,
Second.
CO, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in our original motion for public notification, we did not identify a location for the public hearing. So because there's a notification time constraint, I apologize, but there was some last minute information, and so we wanted to get this to the board so that we could meet the public notification requirements. So we have done that, Ocean Grove Elementary School. And at the same time, because there's some, I guess, concern, for lack of a better word, about we're going to host a hybrid public hearing that Director Wally has informed me as the vice chair that he would not physically be there, that we have the board appoint an alternate vice chair, and our board chair has volunteered to be that, should that be supported by the EA directors. So as we've learned, it's much, much easier to have the chair of the meeting in attendance, and in case there is any challenges with Director Abram physically attending, that the chair would be there and be appointed as the vice chair by the board. Thank you.
Thank you. So on receipt, do we have questions? Director Lee?
Yes. It doesn't matter who's the vice chair as much as it matters who's chairing. And Director Abram has guaranteed me he's going to be there to chair the meeting, and that's fine by me. And so I'll just let it go at that.
Cool. Director Anderson?
Thank you. I don't have a problem with this in principle, but I'm just wondering for clarity, under what authority does a director of the board who's not an EASC member and therefore entitled to vote on this, under what authority are they able to chair or vice chair? This is a new one to me.
Okay, I'll go Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the board, or those members of the board who are entitled to vote on these issues, can really name anybody to chair the public hearing. It doesn't even have to be a director per se. So the fact is that past practice may have been to appoint several directors from the electoral areas to chair these or to hold these hearings, but that is not necessarily a legal requirement that a director or even an electoral area director do that job. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call question on receipt of the CO report. Anyone opposed? Carried. Item B, that Ocean Grove Elementary Gym located Area D be confirmed as a venue for a public hearing for 446, 447. Moved by
So
Director
moved
May.
with thanks to the staff for doing that.
Seconder?
Second.
Wally, thank you. Any discussion? Call questions, anyone opposed? See none carried. Director Unger be appointed to replace Director Wally as the vice chair for the public hearing 446, 447.
Move seat.
Wally, second.
Second.
Lee, thank you. Any discussion? See none carried. No closed, no termination. I'm gonna move termination, and once we move termination, like all directors, just to stay online for a second. So a
Move terminate.
motion to terminate. Director
Move
Wally,
terminate.
seconder.
Second.
Director Adams, thank you. Any question? All in favor? Opposed? Sorry, favor, opposed? Forget which meeting you're at sometimes. Carried. So we're terminated. So the recording is going to be stopped.